Welcome back. In our last journey together, we looked at the deep foundations of this incredible intellectual structure. Today, we're going to climb higher, into the levels that make all that knowledge actually breathe and argue and adapt to the real world.
Right, so in part one, we covered the bedrock, the layers built for preservation and for precision. But a knowledge system can't just be a static library, right? It has to actually engage with life. It has to have a way to explain how we reason, how we apply big ideas, and how wisdom itself can survive the sheer messiness of human existence. And that is what we are digging into today.
So, just as a quick recap, we established that foundation. First, you have the Vedas, those foundational insights. Then the Upanishads, which act as this engine of deep inquiry, asking, what does this all mean? And then you have the Vedangas, the technical toolkit, things like grammar and phonetics that locked it all in place, keeping it precise for literally thousands of years.
So here's where we're headed today. We're making our ascent. We're moving up from the foundation into the really dynamic parts of this structure. From the systems of reasoning to applied knowledge, through these incredibly complex stories, to a point of synthesis, and then finally right out into the world of lived experience. Okay, let's get into it. Our first step up from the foundation. This is where the system just comes alive with critical thought. You could almost call it the grand hall of debate. So this next layer is called the Darśanas, and that word literally means a way of seeing or a point of view. And that is the perfect description, because that's what they are. They're formal, intellectual frameworks, kind of like different operating systems for your mind, each designed to look at reality from a totally different angle. Now here's what is so amazing about this. Each one of these darshanas, it starts from a different set of assumptions. It uses its own logical methods, and no surprise, it arrives at totally different conclusions about reality. But, and this is the key, all of these competing schools of thought were allowed to exist side by side. There was no single enforced doctrine that everyone had to follow. You see, this wasn't seen as a bug in the system, it was a core feature. The whole structure was built on the understanding that reality is just way too complex for any single viewpoint to get the whole picture. That acceptance of intellectual diversity, of argument, it's just fundamental to the design. So what this all means is that this layer is the engine of critical thinking. It's what prevents the whole system from freezing into a rigid dogma. The Darshanas make sure that inquiry doesn't just harden into authority, and that disagreeing is a legitimate, even necessary part of the process. It's what keeps the whole thing intellectually alive. All right, let's move up to the next level. Now we're moving from that world of abstract reasoning into the practical world, where these timeless principles get translated into actual blueprints for society. So, sitting just above philosophy, you find Smṛti. The word means that which is remembered, and this is all about applied knowledge. We're talking ethics, law, governance, social responsibility. This is the layer that bridges those high-level abstract principles with the nuts and bolts of running a civilization. And the real genius of the design is right here. The system makes this crystal clear distinction between Smṛti, which are those foundational, unchanging principles like the Vedas, and Smṛti, which is the application of those principles. Smṛti is built from the ground up to be adaptable. It's meant to change with time, place, and circumstance. And honestly, this separation is absolutely crucial. It creates a framework that has this incredibly stable core, but a flexible outer layer. It means that societal rules, laws, and customs can evolve as the world changes, but without ever having to tear down the philosophical foundation. It's how the system manages to be both stable and adaptable at the same time. Okay, moving up again, we enter a totally different kind of space. We're not talking about rules or logic anymore. Now we're in the realm of complex, sprawling stories. This next level is called Itihasa, and this includes the huge epics like the Rāmāyaṇa and the Mahābhārata. Now, these are so often just written off as myths or ancient history, but they're not. Inside this knowledge system, they have a very specific job. They are massive, complex case studies. Think of them as moral and ethical simulators. And here's the key. These stories almost never give you a simple, clean answer. They don't hand you a list of rules to follow. Instead, they drop characters into impossible situations, with competing duties, with moral gray areas, with deep ambiguity, and they force the learner to wrestle with the dilemma right alongside them. They make you, the one experiencing the story, ask those hard questions. What should they have done in that situation?
Was there even a perfect choice to be made, or was every option flawed in some way?
And what are the real, sometimes tragic, consequences that ripple out from every single decision? This is how you learn through complexity, not just by being told what to do. Now, tucked away inside that massive epic of the Mahābhārata, we find a very special, concentrated text, the Bhagavad Gītā. And believe me, its placement there is no accident at all. You see, the Gita isn't just another text. It functions as a synthesis layer. It's the one point in this whole grand architecture where everything we've talked about comes crashing together. It pulls in the deep philosophical insights from the Darśanas, it pulls in the call to duty and responsibility from Smṛti, and it does it all in a moment of extreme uncertainty, which is the very essence of itihasa.
And because of that, its central question isn't some abstract metaphysical puzzle. It's intensely practical. It asks, how do you act right here, right now, when your knowledge, your duty, and your emotions are all pulling you in different directions? It's basically a decision-making framework for when the stakes are highest, bridging that huge gap between what you think and what you do.
And that brings us, finally, to the very top of the structure. This is the pinnacle. This is where all of the philosophy, all the ethics, all the stories get funneled into actual lived daily experience. And this really shows you the core logic of the whole system. Practice, things like rituals, disciplines, daily conduct. It isn't the starting point. It's the final outcome. In this system, practice is meant to flow from understanding, and that understanding flows from reasoning, and that reasoning is rooted in deep inquiry.
And this makes a hugely important distinction. When a practice is cut off from this deep well of knowledge, it just becomes an empty habit, right? A mechanical ritual. But when it's aligned with and informed by this entire structure underneath it, it becomes embodied wisdom. The action itself is an expression of deep understanding.
So now let's take a step all the way back. Let's get that panoramic view and look at the magnificent, complete structure that we've just walked through together. And here it is, the whole thing. It starts with that foundational insight in the Vedas, which sparks the deep inquiry of the Upanishads, which is then stabilized by the technical tools of the Vedangas. That solid foundation is then stress-tested by the rigorous reasoning of the Darśanas, which is then applied to the real world through Smṛti, and explored through the tough human dilemmas of itihasa, synthesized at a moment of crisis in the Gita, and then finally expressed as lived wisdom through everyday practice. You can just see how each level builds so logically on the one before it. This is not just a random pile of books or a collection of myths. It's a coherent, deliberately designed architecture for knowledge itself. In understanding this system, well, it isn't really about belief. It's about recognizing one of humanity's most sophisticated and incredible attempts to organize how we know what we know. And so that leaves us with one final thought to ponder. In our world, which is so often fragmented between facts over here, ethics over there, and our actions somewhere else entirely, what can our modern ways of thinking learn from an approach to knowledge that is this deeply integrated, connecting thought, wisdom, and life itself?